You are listening to a programme from BBC Radio 4.
Welcome to Sunday. We have a big report today into the evidence that's persuaded some campaigners and lawyers that the Jehovah's Witnesses in this country should be investigated by the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse.
Child abuse is not an epidemic. It's a pandemic. It's everywhere. So what can we do to bring the transparency to these organizations to achieve a goal of protecting children? You know, what can we do now?
Should the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse investigate the Jehovah's Witnesses? We're devoting the rest of the programme to a special report on why some campaigners and lawyers think it should. Their calls come after revelations that branches of the religious organisation in Australia and America have kept a database of alleged abusers for decades and that they don't alert the police to any allegations of abuse that they receive. David Cook reports now on what one respected lawyer calls the molestation files that the Jehovah's Witnesses are fighting to keep secret. He begins with the story of Nick French, whose ordeal began when he was 7 years old and his mother joined the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Not long after my mum became a Jehovah's Witness, she was a single parent by then, she met a male Jehovah's Witness who she subsequently married, but it turns out that he was a paedophile. And even before they got married, he started to groom me, and I underwent physical, mental and sexual abuse.
Nick's abuse continued for 5 years. Even though he was going to the local school, he says he was unable to tell anyone what was happening to him because of the religion's teaching about the outside world.
Anything outside the world of Jehovah's Witnesses is an evil place. You would go to school because the state says that you're to go to school. You certainly wouldn't be involved in anything out with the group because it's under the control of Satan the devil. And you would just limit any association with people outside of the organisation.
Globally, there are around 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses. The largest number are in America, where the Watchtower, the organisation's headquarters, is based. Being a Jehovah's Witness is a way of life for everyone, and you're expected to follow all doctrines issued by the governing body.
Life doesn't only just revolve around it. That is your family. That is your spiritual family. That's all you know, growing up.
Candace Conti was also abused by a Jehovah's Witness. Years later, she discovered that senior members of the congregation knew he was a convicted child abuser.
Jonathan Kendrick was a member of our congregation. He had a way of being very forceful and seemed to take a really big liking to the kids in the congregation. And he ended up molesting me over a course of a couple years. And I think at that point in time, I was too afraid to really say anything. There was a lot of turmoil in my own family, and I was scared.
Eventually, Candace and Nick found the strength to ask for help to stop the abuse. But when they went to the senior leaders in charge of the congregation, this is what happened.
I did speak to my mum, who spoke to the elders within the congregation on several occasions. But because of the fact that there was no other witness to what was going on, and it was my word against his, nothing was done about it.
I pretty much got shut down. I was talking to a brick wall. And the first and foremost, they had said that before we're going to even listen to what you say, you need to tell us what happened, and we need to prove that it happened to you in the first place. At that point, that was when the two-witness rule that you may hear a lot about came out.
The two-witness rule comes from Scripture, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, that you can't ruin somebody's reputation or throw them in prison simply because one person made an accusation. So you need more than one witness, hence the two-witness rule.
This is Trey Bundy. He's from the Centre for Investigative Reporting in the United States, and he's also been trying to break through the wall of secrecy built up by the Jehovah's Witnesses.
When somebody comes forward with an allegation of child abuse, if there are not two witnesses to that crime, the Jehovah's Witness elders don't do anything about it. And they say, basically, we're going to leave this in the hands of Jehovah. The problem is child abuse almost never happens in public or in front of witnesses. So most of these cases go uninvestigated, even within the organization.
Having been a father of an abuse victim, It has come to my notice that this is not an isolated case. In fact, the more we look into it, the more that we realise that child abuse amongst Jehovah's Witnesses is at an epidemic level.
John Viney was a Jehovah's Witness for 50 years and served as an elder, a pastoral leader, for much of that time. Like many of the people I've spoken to, he stresses that the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses are good, honest people. But when it comes to investigating allegations of child abuse, elders do not have the proper skills. John left the organisation after his daughter Karen was abused by an elder.
They are not trained to deal with it. There is no training to deal with such things. You try to be loving and kind and understanding, and you would hope that. And that is true. Elders are encouraged to be good listeners. But as for helping abuse victims, whether they need psychological help, whether they need help in removing them from the bad situation that they're in, we were never qualified to deal with that.
According to the Jehovah's Witnesses' own child safeguarding policy for the UK that was published in January this year, when an allegation of child abuse is made, elders are instructed to call the Bethel, the organisation's headquarters in London, and ask to speak to the legal department for advice. The policy says that they do not condone child abuse under any circumstances. They also consider it to be a serious crime and a sin, and say that anyone committing it would face expulsion from the congregation. Yet there is no direct instruction to report the allegation to the police. This isn't illegal. There is currently no legislation in the UK for the mandatory reporting of allegations of child sex abuse.
You're not going to get Jehovah's Witnesses going to law enforcement and reporting. It's much more uncommon than it is otherwise.
Irwin Zalkin is based in California. His law firm has filed over 20 child sexual abuse cases against the Jehovah's Witnesses. He's fighting to change how reports of abuse are handled by the leadership of the organisation. Irwin's been trying to get access to a database of alleged abusers that the Watchtower started in the late 1990s.
It stems from a letter written in March of 1997 to all these elders throughout the United States to produce very detailed reports regarding these known molesters. So they have this information. We know they have this information.
Irwin Zalkin went to court and requested the disclosure of all reports of child sexual abuse made to the organisation. After a long legal battle, he was sent some of the records in the database, but he can't tell anyone what he has received. He can't even share the files that are locked in his office with the police.
I have an order of protection from the Superior Court of San Diego of California instructing that I can't talk about what I've got. I can tell you that I have 4 years' worth of records that relate to known sexual abusers within the Jehovah's Witnesses who were in positions of authority. There are 20 years' worth of records that we have requested, and the documents that have been provided to us are very heavily redacted. So, for example, the names of the perpetrators have been removed, the towns, the congregation names. So we can't do much with that. We can't track, for example, if you have a perpetrator in a particular congregation that has then moved. Has he reoffended somewhere? We can't tell because we don't have his name.
And it's not just in the United States that the Jehovah's Witnesses have been forced to hand over information. In Australia, the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses into Child Sexual Abuse held a hearing into the organisation. The case report, published in October last year, was highly critical of the organisation's safeguarding policies and practices, including the two-witness rule we heard about earlier. Documents showed that since the 1950s, there could be as many as 1,800 victims of child sexual abuse in Australia. The organisation also knew of over 1,000 alleged abusers, and they admitted to the Royal Commission that not one of them was reported to the police. If such evidence exists in Australia and the United States, what information does the Bethel, the London headquarters of the Jehovah's Witnesses, hold here in Britain? Lawyer Irwin Zalkin and former elder John Viney are convinced that a database of alleged and known abusers is being held.
I know it does. I've spoken to Jehovah's Witness elders within the last couple of weeks to confirm what they have to do if a matter of child abuse comes into their knowledge. There are particular forms that have to be filled out. Some of these now are done electronically, so not necessarily on paper. Even someone that is accused of child abuse, their name and their actions has to be relayed to Bethel so that Bethel keep these on file. They do that because if the abuser was to move to another congregation, at least they would have a record of that. So there is absolutely no doubt that within the Bethel in London, they have what I know would be thousands of names.
I think it absolutely exists. I don't think this is a policy that's just limited to the United States. I think that for the same reasons that they've demanded to have this information in the United States, they would require it in all of what they call their branches, which is wherever they have Jehovah's Witnesses. I call it a crisis of silence. And that's a policy that needs to change.
Lawyers here know that any attempt to get access to information held by the Jehovah's Witnesses will be time-consuming and expensive. In 2014, the Charity Commission launched investigations into the Manchester New Moston congregation and the UK headquarters of the organisation. They wanted to look at their safeguarding policies and check how they managed child abuse allegations. Harvey Grenville, the Charity Commission's head of investigations, says it was a frustrating experience.
These investigations have unfortunately been met by protracted litigation in 5 different courts. We accept that charities can, of course, pursue challenges to some of the decisions that we've made, but this level of litigation has been unprecedented and has frustrated the pace of our investigations. This is something that we regret, not least because of the public and charity funds involved.
With a reputation as aggressive litigants, campaigners and lawyers are calling on the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse here in the UK to formally launch an investigation into the Jehovah's Witnesses.
The thing that is particularly significant about the Jehovah's Witnesses is that they are continuing the practices that they have been following for decades.
Laura Hoyano is a barrister and an associate law professor at the University of Oxford. She has an international reputation for academic research in all criminal, civil and human rights aspects of child abuse. She says there are compelling reasons for the independent inquiry to launch an immediate investigation.
The Jehovah's Witnesses have not had that recent revelation, if you like, and openness. They are continuing their practices, and therefore it is, in my view, vital that the independent inquiry look at their organization and how they deal with child abuse of all forms in order to appreciate how closed institutions operating today in our current public safeguarding environment are still able to conceal what is happening to these children.
We've heard how effective the Jehovah's Witnesses are at stalling the production of data, of information that could be useful to an inquiry. Do we need the independent inquiry into child sex abuse here in the UK to formally open a module, as you call it, into the Jehovah's Witnesses for the production of that information that's held at the Bethel here in the UK?
Yes, definitely. That is going to be by far the most effective way of doing it. And I think that the inquiry has got the powers to require production of those documents. And I understand that they have already taken some steps to ensure that the documents will be retained and not destroyed.
In a statement, the independent inquiry told us,
"We are not able to say at this time whether or not there will be a specific investigation into matters relating to the Jehovah's Witnesses in the future, but there will be ways in which we take into consideration information relating to this institution when carrying out our work."
12 individuals listened to the story of my life that, I hadn't told many people. And they proved them guilty.
In 2011, Candace Conti took the Jehovah's Witnesses to court. A jury awarded her a $28 million verdict after it was shown that the organisation told no one that her abuser had a previous conviction for child abuse. Nick's abuser received a 10-year prison sentence. Candace and Nick are no longer Jehovah's Witnesses.
When my family found out that I was no longer a Jehovah's Witness, they decided to shun me. I received an email from my mum to say this will be the last communication that we have. Sadly, I no longer have a relationship with my mother, my brother, my sister, their children. I assume they live in the same areas that I knew a few years ago, but they may well have moved. As far as they're concerned, I'm dead to them.
Child abuse is not an epidemic. It's a pandemic. It's everywhere. So what can we do to bring the transparency to these organizations to achieve a goal of protecting children? But it's also kind of opened the door for what reforms can we go into now? You know, what can we do now?
People listening to this who may have their own experiences and may be contemplating going to authorities when the stakes appear from the inside to be so high, what's your advice to people?
Be strong and have courage. It's terrible what happened to you. It's terrible. But think about the children that don't have protection, you know, because you lived through it. So be strong and have courage and try to stand up. And it's tough. It's hard. I'm not going to deny that. But the only way that we're going to get change is if you have a voice. So have a voice.
That report from David Cook. The Jehovah's Witnesses declined to take part in this programme. They gave us a statement instead. They said Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse and view it as a heinous crime and sin. They went on, the safety of our children is of utmost importance, and the victim and his or her parents have the absolute right to report the matter to the governmental authorities. Whether the victim or parents decide to report the matter is not contingent on the number of witnesses to the offence or whether a confession has been made. They also say congregation elders do not shield abusers from the authorities or from the consequences of their actions. Anyone who commits the sin of child abuse faces expulsion from the congregation. That's it for this week's Sunday. Do email us sunday@bbc.co.uk or write to us. Dockhouse Media City UK, Salford M50 2LH. I shall be back in this chair next weekend. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.